Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. My name is Jamie, and for the first time in weeks, I'm in a room with John. What's up, man?
Dude, how are you doing?
I'm good. We got way ahead because I had some travel. Obviously, summers are tough. We have families that go on vacations, and we don't, contrary to popular belief, we don't do everything together. We don't always vacation together, so it's the summer's a scheduling puzzle. And we found some time today, so I'm excited.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in American history, which I know you've personally got to be excited about.
Yeah, I love unsolved mysteries and just all the theories that come with them. And this is one I think that's more of a pop culture. We're going to talk about Jimmy Hoffa, and it is a pop culture reference that's almost become like, I don't know, something for humor. Like, I can't find my keys. Jimmy Hoffa'd me. I can't find them.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we always, we meaning like my friends and I in fifth grade would always like, where's Jimmy Hoffa? I don't know.
Yeah,
I had no idea who Jimmy Hoffa was. So this research has been awesome.
Yeah, so before we get started, got a 5-star review that came in last week over on Apple Podcasts. This is from KAC1282, and it says, they are easy to listen to, and this is the first true crime podcast I found that the hosts are open about their faith. This is something that I appreciate and is hard to find. Thank you for what you do and the compassion you show to each victim and case. So
That's
KAC1282, thank you. Thanks a bunch. That's very kind.
Thank you. I was really excited to interview James Warner Wallace a few weeks ago, but I was expecting some backlash, but surprisingly none, or they just went away quietly, which I don't feel like anybody does nowadays.
Yeah, when people are upset, they're usually not quiet about it, but no negative feedback yet. And it was a great conversation. And I don't know if you've talked about it on the air, but you had a ton you wanted to talk to him about that as his crime career that kind of didn't get to because he just kind of took the reins and ran with the conversation.
Yeah, it was about the easiest interview I've ever done because I didn't really have to ask anything. But yeah. Hey, man, I also want to say thank you to some folks over on Patreon that joined us while you were gone. First, we have Cade, came in $3 a month. And then we have Shatira, who joined also at the $3 a month level. And then Jill came in about a week ago, and she joined $3 a month, but signed up for the year, the 15% off an annual membership. So thank you guys for joining. Love to see a few join this week. That's awesome. Thank you guys.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the schedule and see what the first of the month is. Today, our July Patreon episode came out. We had talked about interviewing our writer, Mackenzie, about our differing opinions about Scott Peterson. Weren't able to do that for today. Today's a different case, but we plan to get her on for next month.
Yep, so go check that out. On the first of every month, we upload a bonus episode only for our Patreon members. But as time allows, we also will upload our regular content early and ad-free. Jamie, housekeeping is out of the way. Why don't you get the ball rolling on this one?
Yeah, that's enough stalling. Let's dive in. One of the biggest mysteries in American history, that's Jimmy Hoffa. This is a story of crime. He was involved in union work. He was with the Teamsters, and that's something that I think if we told our kids about labor unions, it's not as popular. When I was growing up, my dad was a coal miner, and unions and pickets and scabs, like that was a constant conversation in my house.
What
and
is
I don't think
scabs? I've never heard of that.
So a scab is essentially somebody that crosses the picket line to work, and
so they
were
take the
hated.
job of the union worker who's on strike.
Yes, so those were looked down upon highly in my neck of the woods when they would cross the picket lines and work in the mines.
And you you did grow up in Harlan County, which has a nickname of Bloody Harlan because of picket lines, right? Because did they beat up scabs or kill scabs?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people died. It was, and Bloody Breathitt as well. Just along the same lines, people lost their lives to protect their livelihood. And the money makers, the people behind everything, caused others to lose their lives because they were greedy. So it's a mess.
So Jimmy Hoffa, I mean, I feel like his name is iconic, but why? Well, he wasn't just a small time union guy. He was probably one of the most powerful labor leaders in the country, and one that the country has ever seen, like one of the biggest the country has ever seen. He would stand toe to toe with politicians, billionaires, and even gangsters, and he sometimes won.
Yeah, and I don't know. I always got the impression that he was a mafia guy because the mafia is so tightly associated with this case, but he wasn't necessarily. Relationships, yes, but he wasn't like a mobster himself as we traditionally think about it.
And that's the misconception I had. I always thought he was a mafia, like gangster himself, like a leader of the mafia, but no, he was a labor leader.
Yeah, a labor leader with the Teamsters. And there have been a lot of movies and pop culture about him. And a lot of it's really, really well done. So super interesting character and story, but also he was a huge name. In the days before social media, there weren't a ton of names that everybody knew, but Jimmy Hoffa was one of them. So how does somebody who's in the public eye, who's that famous and well-known, vanish and without a trace for years and years and decades?
So let's back up and get to know this guy. So James Riddle Hoffa was born on February 14th, 1913 in Brazil, Indiana.
Brazil, Indiana. And I'm going to stop you there. The biggest mystery in American history, and his middle name's Riddle? Come on.
That's funny, right?
That's heavy-handed.
That's, I don't know, foreshadowing in your name. His dad was a coal miner, but tragedy struck early. His father actually died when Hoffa was just 7 years old. After his father passed, Hoffa's mother, Viola, moved to the family to Detroit, Michigan, and life was tough. I mean, growing up without a dad has to be tough, but also that was where the money was, right, at the time. So they lived a very modest, to say the least, life. They were poor, and Jimmy had to drop out of school by the time he was a freshman in high school to help support his family.
And in our country, for those who may not be as familiar with the American industry landscape. At this time, it was motor vehicles. Detroit's the center of that, right? Like the Ford Motor Company, and coal mining, the oil industry were the primary like labor groups. And him seeing his dad pass away, his dad was, again, part of coal mining. That's a huge, which I didn't know they had coal in Brazil, Indiana, but they apparently do. So it's something that shaped Jimmy forever. He didn't come from any kind of privilege. He didn't come up knowing power. He didn't come up in a position where he was automatically granted these leadership opportunities. But what he knew was he knew how to work hard, and he enjoyed it. And he was good about connecting with people who could make things happen and getting things done, whether that's working with billionaires of the industry, working with mobsters who he needed help with to do some bidding. He made those connections, and he grew up watching workers get exploited by these wealthy employers. You and we did some episodes about Harlan County. Your dad was connected to that, like the Bennett family owns Harlan County had owned the county as far as coal goes, and they controlled. I mean, there's still some there, but at one time controlled pretty much the entire economy. And these people really do so much of that. And this is all on the heels, at least in Jimmy's life, of the Great Depression. So he had a strong sense of work ethic, of justice, and he wanted to make sure that workers were taken care of. At least that's what he put forward to other people.
And that sense of justice that he had was always mixed with a little bit of a willingness to bend the rules, so to speak. So if the system was unfair, then why not buck the system or break the system? And that philosophy would follow him his entire life. And it's important to note that Hoffa was a charismatic guy. Even people who would go on to hate him admitted that when he walked into a room, you knew it. It was a mix of toughness and then just charm that made him a natural leader. I mean, I think we all know people like that who they might be firm in their business dealings, but they're just very charismatic. And I think that's what lends itself nicely to being a good businessman. but charisma could only get you so far. Hoffa had an instinct for organizing, rallying people, negotiating deals, and when needed, he would flex his muscle to get what he wanted. Hoffa's entry into the labor movement came when he was just 18 years old. He was working at a grocery warehouse when the conditions were brutal. There was no security, no job security rather. There were very low wages and very long hours.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. And again, this is a grocery warehouse, so this isn't one of those prime industries, but it's very much indicative of the rest of the labor force at this point in his life. And just to go back to what you were saying about his charisma, I think the word Riz has already come and gone in popular culture, but he was the representative of that, I believe. The breaking point came when the workers were forced to wait for hours unpaid while produce shipments arrived late. So essentially you're there to work, you're there to help unload the trucks and get everything in. And when the trucks were late, you just lost time.
Yeah, you had to stay there, but you weren't getting paid. So I would understand the fury that would come with that.
And this was his first chance to step up and say, we can do something about this. This was his first taste of labor activism. And, you know, anything 50s, 60s, 70s, activism, protests, people standing up for what they believed was right. We still see that today. It's going on around the country, but I think this was kind of the emergence of activism, and he was right in the front of it for the labor front. There's a famous story about how he recruited workers to join his efforts. He walked up to a truck driver who was sitting in his truck, and he said, "You can sit out here all day without getting paid, or we can all walk out together and make them pay." And just like that, the driver was in. He was a guy that other people wanted to follow, and he knew how to talk to people about getting what they wanted. This is when he started working with the Teamsters, and that was a relatively small union. At the time, they primarily represented truck drivers all over the country. But Hoffa saw something bigger, and he saw the potential of this group in meeting the needs for workers all over the country.
Well, and he saw something even deeper than that. He saw that the transportation of the country controlled commerce. So if you shut down trucks, you essentially shut down everything. And this gave the Teamsters some extraordinarily high leverage when it came to making these unions and these deals, because the ball was really in their court. So Hoffa wasted no time using that leverage. By the late 1930s, he was a key figure in the Detroit chapter of Teamsters, known as the Local 299. Detroit was a major transportation hub, so gaining power there meant they had national influence. Jamie, I love Detroit. I love what it used to be, but now it is just so sad to see the state Detroit is in now. But you can look at Detroit, drive down the streets, and realize that at this time that we're talking about, in the late 30s, 40s, 50s, that place had to be just booming. And if they were able to shut down some of the trucks, then they had major power. But here's where that story gets complicated. In the 1930s and 40s, organized labor wasn't just battling corporations. They were battling rival unions and often organized crime. The mob saw unions as an opportunity. Millions of dollars in pension funds, dues, and the power to shut down industries.
Yeah, that's a lot of power. And, you know, the way you said that made me think, what do we call people who look for a need in society and capitalize on it for business? We call those people entrepreneurs now. Of course, they're doing some illegal stuff, but mobsters are very entrepreneurial. What did I say that right? Entrepreneurial?
I don't know that that's a word, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. So it's
it's just an opportunity that may not be legal.
Yeah, right. So they the lines are either blurred or maybe they don't exist. And Hoffa wasn't naive to that. He knew the opportunities that were out there for people that had good intentions and people who had selfish intentions, but he also saw the mafia as a means to an end. If you need muscle to break up a picket line, the mob has muscle. If you need help pressuring employers, the mob was happy to help, making threats. Leave a horse head in somebody's bed for a price. By the early 50s, Hoffa had essentially made peace with the mob. The Teamsters grew rapidly under his leadership because he wasn't afraid to do what it took to meet the needs of the workers, to meet the desires of the Teamsters, and if he had to, he would even play dirty. But it wasn't just corruption. He delivered results. Drivers got paid more, they got better retirement benefits, safer conditions, and everybody loved him for it. He was making so many lives better through his work that he was somewhat of a folk hero to a lot of the truckers all over the country.
Yeah, I mean, people had to look up to this guy and love what he was doing because it equaled money in their pockets, a better life for them and their families, and then even money to retire on. I mean, nowadays, am I going to get in trouble for saying we might need more Hoffas? Because they're like, I know there are still unions, but not near as many as there used to be.
Right. Not nearly as many as there used to be. And yeah, it's I don't know.
I want to unionize.
Yeah. Unionized podcasting.
It all came to a head. No, it all came to a head in 1957. That is not a bad idea though, right? Like if we all just said enough, you're going to pay us more. No, I'm kidding. So this all came to a head in 1957 when Hoffa was elected as the national president of the Teamsters. So he now controlled a union with over 2 million members. So think about that for a second. 2 million people that made up the Teamsters, and this was one of the most powerful institutions in America. It also meant that Hoffa had access to an enormous pension fund that was worth billions in today's money. So those funds were located out of mob-run casinos, hotels, and shady businesses. So that's some of those monies from those pensions were loaned to those places. So I don't know. That's a little shady to me because it's a risk that your people may not ever see the return on, right?
Right.
Still, Hoffa had an undeniable amount of political power. Presidents had to reckon with him. They had to work with him. Senators had to take his calls. Corporate CEOs knew that if Hoffa didn't want your trucks moving, then they were not going to move. But on the flip side, the mob was getting nervous. Hoffa was growing too powerful, even for them, and law enforcement, especially the FBI under then J. Edgar Hoover, who started the FBI, started seeing Hoffa as a public enemy instead of someone who was helping everyone in his union.
Yeah, and with the FBI involved, if you heard us cover the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, the FBI was very, J. Edgar Hoover was kind of a dictator and did what he wanted. So with them involved and him seeing Hoffa as an enemy like he had later on after this, Martin Luther King Jr., it's not going to end well for everyone. Let's say that. And Hoffa didn't help his case. He was out there being bold. He was arrogant about what he wanted and the power that he carried with him. There are stories about him walking into meetings with federal prosecutors and just daring them to try and take him down, almost mocking them when they were making these threats. But he didn't have luck forever running away from the law. Eventually, they started catching up with him and some of his activities came to light. And we'll talk about how he handled that when we get back from the break.
Definitely caught up with Jimmy Hoffa. So by the 1960s, he was facing multiple federal charges, indictments for bribery, fraud, and jury tampering. In 1967, he was convicted and sentenced to 13 years in prison, but Hoffa being Hoffa, even prison did not stop this guy. He continued to pull strings, still trying to control the Teamsters from behind bars. And that's where the seeds of his disappearance were planted, because Hoffa was finally released thanks to President Nixon, who commuted his sentence, and he wasn't ready to retire. He wanted his power back. So The problem was that while he wanted his power back, the mob did not want him back, and neither did the leadership of the Teamsters, who had really gotten comfortable in their new role without him. So the tension was that this was Hoffa versus the mob. This was Hoffa versus the Union, would ultimately lead to one of the greatest mysteries in American history. No longer was he welcomed by the people that he represented. They were actually against him.
And that's right. By the early 60s, the federal government had Hoffa in their crosshairs. There was a change in leadership in the White House, and the person leading the charge against Hoffa, and in some ways related, this person was also after the mafia, and that is Robert F. Kennedy, who was the Attorney General when his brother John F. Kennedy was president. He made it his personal mission to take down the mafia, to take down those who were exploiting their power and taking advantage of the system, and that included Jimmy Hoffa. So the Kennedy and Hoffa feud was for the history books. Hoffa wasn't just any target, one person that they hoped they could catch slipping up. He was one of the biggest labor bosses in the country, and Kennedy was determined to expose him for his corruption, racketeering, and his ties to organized crime, which Kennedy absolutely hated.
You would think that that kind of move would make this make Kennedy like a target for some kind of organized crime hit. Oh, wait.
Right?
Did we ever get the unredacted version of whatever happened to his brother John F. Kennedy that we were promised?
You know, they unredacted some things. They released a lot of others, but there's been no bombshell that's been in the release documents to say, look, we told you this person was involved or that person was involved. Basically, I think all we learned was that the CIA knew a lot more about Oswald than they let on.
So back to Hoffa. In 1964, after years of new investigations and failed attempts to convict him, Hoffa was finally charged and convicted on 2 major federal counts. First, he was convicted for jury tampering. Again, Hoffa had tried to influence the jury in a previous trial for bribery charges, and then he was accused of paying thousands of dollars to jurors in order to swing their verdict in his favor. Then, just a few months later, Hoffa was hit with another blow, this time a conviction for fraud and misusing Teamster pension funds. You know, when I told you that he was putting these funds on loans to casinos and other, not great establishments, that's not okay. So he was prosecuted and held accountable for that. Prosecutors argued that Hoffa had used pension money like his own personal piggy bank. He was funneling millions of dollars into risky loans and shady business deals that benefited his mafia connections, but came at the risk for all those people who were putting their literal lives in his hands. I mean, your pension back then, and your pension, if you're lucky enough to have one now, that is your future security. That is how you are going to provide for yourself later on in life. And to mess around with that money is not okay.
And to go back to why he started all this, it was to meet the needs of workers and make sure they were taken care of. So he has essentially at this point become the type of person that he set out to bring down. And it really started to put him, he became a less popular guy. And his second conviction is what really sealed his fate. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison, 8 years for jury tampering, and 5 for the pension fund fraud. In 1967, he finally started serving his time at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. But here's the thing. Being in prison didn't mean that he lost all his power. At this point, John, he is a mob person. I said he wasn't part of the mafia, but he is like organized crime, if we're attaching that to mafia. That's what he was doing. And even behind bars, he continued to run the Teamsters. He continued to communicate with officials. He gave orders, touched base with his criminal allies, and continued leveraging all those illegal connections to give himself more power and to continue to bolster the Teamsters.
He even ran for re-election as Teamsters president while he was in prison. But pressure from the government and from his own union leadership forced him to step aside. But What a move. Like president behind bars. I mean, we almost had that in real life, right?
We did.
That led to a major turning point in Hoffa's story. So in 1971, after serving just 4 years, Hoffa was released from prison due to the pardon that we mentioned earlier, but the pardon came with a condition, a very important one. Hoffa was prohibited from engaging in any union activities until at least 1980. So that was 9 years away from his release. So let's just say that Jimmy Hoffa had no intention of waiting that long, which again was the condition of his release. Hoffa immediately started making moves to regain control of the Teamsters, but the problem was the landscape had changed while he was locked up. I mean, we mentioned that he got out, the Teamsters had already moved on, the mob, had moved on, so things were not the same as when he was entered into jail.
Things had really passed him by, and the Teamsters had a new boss. That was Frank Fitzsimmons, who had cozied up even closer to the mafia. So those crime bosses, they didn't want Hoffa in power. They had Fitzsimmons pretty much under their thumb, and they liked that because he was easier to control and more predictable than Hoffa had been. Regardless, Hoffa started pushing harder, talking to Teamster members, giving interviews, making it clear that he wanted to be back in power, and he didn't think Fitzsimmons was doing a good job. And that's when the trouble for him started that ended, of course, in his disappearance. Sources at the time said Hoffa was getting desperate. He was meeting with mobsters. He was trying to negotiate his way back into power. He had meetings with people like Anthony, who was nicknamed Tony Provenzano, who was a mobster and Teamster official from New Jersey. But Tony Pro and Hoffa, they had history. They had fought in prison, and their feud was pretty bitter. So Hoffa had threatened to expose the mob's influence over the Union if they didn't help him get back into power. Threatening the mob, John, not always the best idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that's going to play out well, and in fact, it didn't. So let's move into the part of the story that we're all here for, and that is Jimmy's disappearance. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa left his home in Lake Orion, Michigan, and he said that he was going to meet Tony Provenzano and Anthony Giacolone at the Machus Red Fox Restaurant in Bloomfield Township, which was a suburb of North Detroit. According to reports, Hoffa arrived at the restaurant parking lot around 2 p.m., and he waited, but the men that he was supposed to meet never showed up, or at least that's what Hoffa had told his family members in a phone call just after 2:15 p.m. Witnesses later reported seeing Hoffa standing outside the restaurant, pacing near his car, and then he vanished. His car, a green 1974 Pontiac Granville, was later found in the restaurant parking lot, unlocked. His keys were still inside, but Hoffa was gone.
And once he was reported missing, this wasn't just a regular missing persons investigation. Almost immediately, the FBI got involved, and they called this the Hoffex investigation. And their official file on Hoffa's disappearance is labeled as such, and it became one of the biggest investigations in FBI history. In the course of their investigation, they interviewed hundreds of people, mob bosses, Teamster officials, Hoffa's family, known associates, and even customers who'd been at the restaurant the day that he disappeared, but nobody could, or maybe would, say what they saw or say what they think happened. Over the years, there have been a ton of theories about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Some people say that he was picked up by the mob and taken to a house where he was killed. Others believe that he was driven to a remote location, buried under concrete. The most famous theory is that he's buried in the end zone of Giant Stadium, but that obviously has never been confirmed, and that's just more, at this point, I think, of a kind of fun thing to say that he's under a football stadium. Again, this has become a pop culture thing and less of a missing persons reference over the years. No evidence has been found to support that he's under the stadium. But what are some theories and suspects that may have a little more weight, John?
I definitely want to dig into that, but going back to the Giant Stadium, am I totally crazy, or did Mythbusters do an episode or somebody did a TV show where they
did a
basically
scan.
did a scan or LiDAR or something underground.
Yeah, they didn't dig it up, but they did a scan and couldn't find anything resembling a body or a barrel.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that it's got to be somewhere, but we don't know where. So, okay, possible suspects. Well, at the top of the list, we've already talked about him. Anthony, who is known as Tony Pro. He was in the Genovese crime family out of New Jersey, and he also served as a vice president in the Teamsters. I mean, we know from what we talked about earlier, he and Hoffa hated each other. They weren't just rivals. I mean, they had downright vicious personal feuds. While they were in prison together, they had reportedly gotten to a physical altercation. Tony Pro allegedly threatened to rip Hoffa's guts out and kidnap his grandchildren. You can threaten to rip my guts out all day long, but taking it to the next level of I will kidnap your grandchildren, this dude hated Jimmy Hoffa. That's something that I would never say to my worst enemy.
And this is also something that he would do. Like, the mafia didn't become the mafia for making empty threats. This was a legit threat.
Yeah, so Hoffa told his friends that he did not trust Tony Pro, and of course, I wouldn't trust this guy either. But he felt he had no choice but to negotiate with him if he wanted his Teamsters presidency back. But those negotiations did not go well. Some reports say that Tony Pro refused outright, while others suggest that Hoffa may have threatened to expose his mafia involvement in the Teamsters if he didn't back him.
And the mafia, while Hoffa had power, the mafia, they were the ones with the muscle, right? And Tony Pro wasn't the only mob figure in this story. Another name we already mentioned was Anthony Giacolone, who went by Tony Jack. That's a pretty solid nickname, I think. He was a Detroit mobster who was supposedly helping arrange a sit-down between Hoffa and Tony Pro. But Tony Jack was known for acting as a mediator and not necessarily getting his hands dirty. But what's strange here is that both Tony Pro and Tony Jack had airtight alibis for the afternoon of Hoffa's disappearance. Phone records and witnesses placed Tony Pro at the union headquarters in New Jersey for the Teamsters and Tony Jack at a health club in Detroit, almost as if they went above and beyond to show that they were physically somewhere else, which is exactly what you do if you're trying to create an alibi.
So, yes, but I mean, if you're as powerful as these guys, yes, you probably could make anything happen that you wanted to, but you have enough power and control that you can just make this happen without you being physically present.
Yeah.
You can make one of your minions go out and do this for you. So their physical whereabouts really, in my mind, doesn't matter, but it's who under them could they have employed to do something like this.
Absolutely. And they had the power, like you said, to do that. And I think that's why it's tough to bring the mafia down a lot of times, because the people actually doing the dirty work aren't the names you know and aren't able to be as easily tracked. There's also Salvatore Briguglio, known as Sally Bugs, who is a mob hitman and one of Tony Pro's top enforcers. So this is the type of person that goes out and gets his hands dirty. There have been a lot of informants over the years that have said that Sally Bugs was likely the one, if Tony Pro was involved, that physically carried out this murder. So he is a suspect of actually committing the murder, while Tony Pro is more being accused of ordering the hit, I think.
So there's also the theory, and probably one of the most trusted theories, is that perhaps when he showed up at the restaurant that day for a meeting, they think someone may have been in a car that he knew and trusted, and he picked him up. And then once he got in the car, that's when it was really a trap that had sprung. So the theory goes that Hoffa was driven to a house somewhere nearby, likely murdered. He was likely strangled to avoid a messy crime scene. And then his body was disposed of in a way that ensured it was never found. And I mean, we can tell you, as far as we know, it's never been found, right? Disposal theories are an entire rabbit hole all of their own. Some think that Hoffa perhaps was cremated in a mob-controlled funeral home. Others say that he might have been placed in a steel drum and shipped to a landfill, or even dropped into one of the Great Lakes. If you think of a lake, the Great Lakes are like an ocean. I mean, you cannot see from one shore to the other. In some places, these are massive. So that is a possibility too.
Absolutely. And we mentioned the New York Giants rumor. That was an idea that a mafia informant floated to authorities in the 80s, probably just, I don't know. It's like, I don't know, maybe he's in Giant Stadium under the end zone. Was that good?
I mean, yeah.
Was that not bad?
Sounded like a mobster to me.
There's also Frank Sheeran, and
Ed's dad.
This is not related to Ed that I know of, but Frank confessed in a book called I Heard You Paint Houses, in a Netflix movie, The Irishman, which is a De Niro Pacino movie. Sheeran, who is a trusted Hoffa ally and alleged mafia hitman, claimed that he personally shot Hoffa in a house in Detroit. Sheeran said that after Hoffa was shot, his body was cremated. Investigators have always been skeptical about this confession, though. There have been so many deathbed confessions about this, about D.B. Cooper. I mean, anybody can claim to be involved, but there are a lot of inconsistencies in Sheeran's timeline, and forensic searches of the house where he said it happened came back inconclusive. There was no blood found that was linked to Hoffa. There was no murder weapon found, so it's likely an empty confession, but it's out there.
There's another theory. This one involves a man named Chucky O'Brien. This was Hoffa's longtime aide and surrogate son. Is a surrogate son just like he's like a son to you? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I think that's what it means. In
someone actually carried him in his womb, and he's not.
I think
Hoffa.
This is in like I think of it like
you're like a son to me.
Yeah, like a godson situation.
Surrogate son. Some believe that O'Brien was the one who got Hoffa to get into a car at the restaurant. There was a borrowed car that O'Brien had been using, and inside of it, they found a few dog hairs which matched the Hoffa's family dog, suggesting that Hoffa had been in the vehicle shortly before his disappearance. But to be fair, O'Brien always denied any involvement. He said the dog hairs came from delivering a fish in the car that day, which sounds convenient, but I don't know. I mean, if he's a surrogate son, I'm sure that Hoffa may have been around him more than just in an attempt to murder Hoffa. So I don't know.
And there was
no blood DNA, just a dog hair.
The overused line of making you sleep with the fishes. So delivering a fish is a little convenient.
Oh yeah. I never thought of it that way. It's worth noting that the FBI in their official files concluded that the mafia orchestrated Hoffa's murder to prevent his return to power for the Teamsters, but they could never gather enough evidence to charge anyone. So these are the theories, and I don't know.
There are a few that don't include the mafia, and I don't know. I think the mafia was involved. Some people think the CIA may have done this to prevent Hoffa from sharing the knowledge he had of clandestine operations between the government and organized crime during the Cold War. Again, going back to the John F. Kennedy assassination, the CIA was doing some really shady stuff in Cuba and otherwise. They were working with the mafia in certain ways. So how much did Hoffa know, and was that enough for the CIA to get rid of him? I doubt it. There's the idea that there was a group of corrupt Teamsters that wanted him gone just as much as the mafia did. So maybe they planned it out and used the mafia influence to know how to do it and get away with it. But yeah, I think it was probably the mafia. Maybe the Teamsters were involved as well, but there's just a lot going on here, and there have been so many people over the course of time that have confessed to this, confessed to being the shooter, confessed to hiding the body, confessed to so many things that it's really hard to keep up with. And in the decades since this happened, investigators continue to search places. They've searched fields, farmland, lakes, and yes, even stadiums. In 2003, the FBI dug up a backyard pool in Michigan after getting a tip that he may have been buried underneath that and the pool put on top of it. But they found nothing.
What if I wanted a pool? Could I be like, hey, somebody told me that here in Kentucky, in my backyard, they actually buried Jimmy Hoffa. And then when they dig it up, I'm like, wait, guys, stop. Okay, I'll use that as a pool.
Yeah, they're like, we'll clean this up. It's like, no, we're good. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I hate to get you out here. I'll take care of it from here, fellas. No, I mean, do you think that we're ever going to figure out what happened to this guy?
I think it's possible. here's the problem. I think that people knew, absolutely people knew, but I think we're getting to the point now where the people that knew for sure and were there or knew who was there may be dead now. Like, the actual people involved may not be around to tell us the truth. In 2006, they searched a horse farm in Milford Township, Michigan. Again, nothing. 2013, they excavated an empty lot in Oakland Township, found nothing. The last major search came in 2021, where they searched a landfill in New Jersey after a tip came that they had put him in a barrel in a landfill. So every search they has come up with nothing. And we're nearly 50 years later. What do you think? We going to find him?
No, I think it's that ship has already sailed. I think this will be an American mystery for as long as I'm alive, but I don't know.
I mean, think if somebody comes forward and says, yeah, I know who did it, and then they find a barrel where they say there was a barrel, like, are we even going to believe them at that point?
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, it goes, okay, if we find his body, then what? I mean, I think the likelihood of there being any kind of physical evidence that's going to pinpoint a specific person at this time is probably, I think all hope has vanished for that. I mean, look, if this was a mafia thing and there are mafia ran funeral homes, the likelihood of him being cremated, I think at that point is pretty high. And if that was the case, then we'll never find anything from him.
Which, I mean, if they have access to that, not to help people be criminals, but why don't you do that every time?
Yeah.
Let's just cremate everybody so there's no evidence. And, you know, there are also people out there who would say that he entered witness protection, or he collaborated with the government, or he disappeared on his own. He was the kind of power-hungry guy that I don't think is just going to walk away from opportunities to be seen and be powerful. So I don't really buy any of that either. So I think somebody did kill him. And at this point, I'm afraid we're not really going to find out who, why, or where.
I think you're right. Jamie, thank you for bringing this one to me, man. A lot of new knowledge about Jimmy Hoffa that I did not know before. Up until the research on this one, I just thought he was a mafia member himself. So yeah. a lot of new information for me.
As much as he dealt with the mafia, he may as well have been a mobster, but he was not a part of any of the official families, for sure.
Yeah, I think he started out with good intentions, but then the money and power got to him.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Isn't that the phrase?
I've never heard that until now, but I think it's accurate.
I like it. Guys, we appreciate you a ton. Again, if you like what we're doing here and want to support us, a 5-star review is the best way to do that. Share on social media, tell a friend, tell your mom, tell your mom's friends. Let them know we're here.
Yeah, join us on Patreon. For $3 a month, you get a bonus episode. This very day, there's a brand new one out, so go over patreon.com and check it out.
You guys are the best. Can't wait to come back with another one.
Until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.